3 days before my wedding, I pushed open the heavy oak door of my Manhattan penthouse and caught my sister tangled in the sheets of my bridal bed with my fiancé. She had stolen from me my entire life, taking my clothes, my opportunities, and my parents' affection. But this time I did not cry. I did not scream. I got even. My name is Chelsea. I am 33 years old and I manage a venture capital fund in New York City while advising on corporate mergers. For years, my family dismissed me as the boring corporate drone, a stark contrast to my beautiful, outgoing sister. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had returned early from a grueling business trip in Chicago. The elevator opened directly into my $3 million penthouse. I dropped my leather travel bag in the foyer. The apartment was completely silent. I walked down the long hallway toward the master suite. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. There they were. Derek, the 34-year-old man I was supposed to marry on Saturday, and Brittany, my 30-year-old sister. They were in my bed. The custom silk sheets I had purchased for our wedding night were kicked down to the floor. For a fraction of a second, the world simply stopped spinning. I felt a physical drop in my stomach, a cold wave of realization that washed away decades of trying to please my family. Brittany did not scream. She did not scramble for her clothes. My sister, the lifestyle influencer who funded her designer wardrobe entirely with our parents' credit cards, simply pulled the white duvet up to cover her chest. She looked at me and actually smirked. "I am sorry, Chelsea," Brittany said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "But he has always liked me better. You are just too rigid. You never know how to have fun." Derek, on the other hand, panicked. He scrambled backward, nearly falling off the mattress, frantically pulling on his trousers. "Chelsea, it is not what it looks like," he stammered, his face pale. "You are always gone. You work 80-hour weeks. You left me alone and Brittany was just here to help with the wedding planning. We had a moment of weakness. You practically forced me into this by ignoring our relationship." I stood there perfectly still. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at the man I had financially supported for 3 years. Derek was the founder of a tech startup, a charismatic talker who relied heavily on my financial stability, while he pitched his supposed billion-dollar ideas to investors. And there was my sister, the golden child of the family, looking at me with triumph in her eyes. This was the ultimate theft in a lifelong pattern of taking what belonged to me. Before I could even respond to Derek and his pathetic excuses, I heard the elevator chime in the foyer. Heavy footsteps clicked down the hallway. My mother, Patricia, burst through the bedroom door. Brittany must have texted her the moment she heard my travel bag hit the floor. Patricia did not look shocked. She did not look at Derek with disgust. Instead, her eyes locked onto me, blazing with immediate irritation. Patricia was 58 years old, a woman whose entire existence revolved around keeping up appearances in our wealthy Connecticut hometown. "Keep your voice down," Patricia snapped, marching right up to me as if I were the one caught committing a crime. "Do not make a scene, Chelsea." Brittany sent me a message. "She is pregnant." The word hung in the air. Pregnant. "If you cancel this wedding," Patricia continued, her tone escalating into a frantic hiss, "the family will be completely ruined. The entire country club knows about this ceremony. Your father and I have invited our most important business partners. We cannot face that kind of social humiliation. You have always been obsessed with your job anyway. You do not even care about starting a family as much as she does. Just let her have him." I looked at my mother. She and my father Richard had always favored Brittany. I was the scapegoat, the workhorse they called boring, while Brittany was the fragile, beautiful prize they protected at all costs. Whenever Brittany made a mistake, my parents forced me to fix it. To Patricia, my broken engagement was not a tragedy. It was merely a logistical inconvenience that threatened her social standing. "You want me to step aside?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You want me to hand over the man who just betrayed me in my own home so you do not lose face at the country club?" "Yes," Patricia demanded, lifting her chin. "Be the bigger person for once in your life, Chelsea." You have plenty of money. You can find someone else. Brittany needs this. She needs a husband and the baby needs a father. Do not be selfish. Derek looked between me and my mother, a cowardly sigh of relief escaping his lips. He realized he was not going to be thrown out on the street. He realized my family was actually going to protect him. Brittany smiled, leaning her head against the headboard, looking like a victorious queen who had just conquered my territory. I looked at the three of them. A lifetime of being pushed aside, of having my achievements ignored, while Brittany was celebrated for simply existing, crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. I did not feel heartbroken anymore. I felt surgical. Fine, I said. The word was sharp and crisp. Keep him. The wedding happens this Saturday exactly as planned, but with Brittany in the white dress. Patricia exhaled a massive sigh of victory, her shoulders slumping in relief. Oh, thank God, she murmured, already pulling out her phone to calculate how quickly the alterations could be done. Derek wiped the sweat from his forehead, giving me a pathetic look of gratitude. Brittany just beamed, clearly thrilled that she had finally stolen the ultimate prize from her older sister. They were so busy celebrating their seamless transition that none of them noticed me slip my hand into my blazer pocket. I pulled out my phone, my thumb moving swiftly across the screen. I opened my secure messaging app and typed a single decisive order to my executive assistant. Initiate Project D recall immediately. I hit send. The trap was set. They thought they had won the battle, but they had absolutely no idea they had just declared a war they could never possibly survive. Section 2. 1,000 words. The next morning, the sun rose over the Manhattan skyline, pouring harsh light into my expansive kitchen. I was standing at the marble island sipping my black coffee, feeling remarkably rested for a woman whose life had imploded the day before. My phone was silent, a rare occurrence that allowed me to focus completely on the execution of my strategy. The elevator doors chimed open directly into the living room. Patricia stormed into my kitchen, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She did not bother knocking. She never did. She marched right up to the kitchen island and slammed a heavy cream-colored envelope down on the marble. "You need to take care of this today," Patricia commanded, not even offering a good morning. Her face was set in a rigid mask of entitlement, completely ignoring the reality of what had transpired in my bedroom less than 24 hours ago. I glanced down at the paper. It was the final invoice for the wedding venue and the luxury catering company. The total at the bottom of the page read $150,000. Why exactly am I looking at a bill for a wedding I'm no longer participating in? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Because Brittany does not have any savings, Patricia snapped, crossing her arms defensively. You know she works as an influencer. Her income is unpredictable. And Derek has all his capital tied up in his tech startup right now. They cannot afford to cover this, and your father and I have our own expenses. You are the one with the high-paying job. You agreed the wedding would go forward. You need to pay the vendors today, or they will cancel the entire event. I stared at my mother, marveling at the sheer audacity of her demand. She was standing in my kitchen demanding I fund the celebration of their betrayal. This was the pinnacle of her lifelong favoritism. She truly believed my only purpose was to finance Brittany's happiness. Before I could respond, the door to the guest hallway opened. Kendra walked out. Kendra is my 35-year-old sister-in-law, married to my older brother Jason. She is a brilliant, no-nonsense corporate litigator. As an African-American woman who had fought her way to the top of a prestigious law firm, Kendra possessed a fierce sense of justice and absolutely zero tolerance for my parents' toxic behavior. She was staying with me for the week to help with the final wedding preparations, and she had witnessed the entire fallout the previous afternoon. Kendra walked into the kitchen holding a steaming mug of coffee. She took one look at the invoice on the counter, scoffed, and picked it up. She threw it right back at Patricia's chest. The paper fluttered to the floor. "Are you out of your mind?" Kendra asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Last year, Chelsea bought Brittany a brand new Range Rover just to stop her from throwing a tantrum during the family vacation. Chelsea has bailed this family out of debt time and time again. And now you want her to fund a luxury wedding for her cheating ex-fiancé and the sister who stabbed her in the back. Get out of this apartment. Patricia bristled, her face turning an ugly shade of red. She glared at Kendra with pure contempt. This is a family matter, Patricia sneered. You are an outsider. You do not understand how our family works. We protect each other. We make sacrifices for the greater good. Chelsea has a duty to her sister. You have no right to interfere in blood relations. Kendra took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. Blood does not give you the right to act like a parasite. If you think I am going to stand here and watch you extort Chelsea, you are sadly mistaken. Kendra, I said softly. I placed a hand on Kendra's arm, gently stopping her from tearing my mother apart verbally. I looked at Patricia, picking up a silver pen from the counter. I pulled my checkbook from my bag. I calmly wrote out a check for $150,000. I signed my name with a flourish, ripped the check from the pad, and handed it to Patricia. It is a wedding gift, Mom, I said, maintaining direct eye contact. Make sure the vendors know the payment comes from me. Patricia snatched the check from my hand, a triumphant smirk replacing her anger. See, she said, looking pointedly at Kendra. Chelsea understands loyalty. She knows how to behave like a proper daughter. Without another word, Patricia turned on her heel and marched back to the elevator, her prize secured. The doors closed behind her, leaving a tense silence in the kitchen. Kendra turned to me, her expression a mix of disbelief and sheer fury. What is wrong with you? Kendra demanded, setting her coffee mug down so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. Why did you just give that monster a small fortune? They humiliated you. They betrayed you, and you just paid for their party. Chelsea, you are smarter than this. I did not argue. I simply walked over to my laptop, sitting on the kitchen desk, and opened it. I entered my decryption password and pulled up a highly confidential financial report. I turned the screen around so Kendra could see it. I did not just buy a wedding, Kendra, I said quietly. I bought access. I bought compliance. I bought the assurance that they will all walk down that aisle with absolute confidence. Kendra frowned, leaning in to look at the screen. What am I looking at? She asked, her litigator instincts kicking in as her eyes scanned the complex spreadsheets. These are the internal financial records for Derek's tech startup, I explained, pointing to a column of bright red numbers. He has been telling everyone he is on the verge of a billion-dollar initial public offering. He told my parents he was going to be the most successful man in the family. He used that narrative to win their favor and justify his arrogant behavior. Kendra traced the numbers with her finger, her eyes widening. He is not making a profit, she noted. It is worse than that, I replied. He is bleeding millions of dollars every single month. His burn rate is catastrophic. He has zero revenue, massive overhead, and his primary investors pulled out 3 weeks ago. Derek's company is not a unicorn. It is a sinking ship, and he is legally bankrupt. Kendra looked up at me, a slow, predatory smile beginning to form on her lips. She understood immediately. You knew this, she said. You knew he was broke when you caught them yesterday. I smiled back. I knew exactly who I was handing my sister over to. But this is just the beginning, Kendra. Because Derek was so desperate for cash to keep up his facade, he took out a highly toxic emergency bridge loan last month. And you will never guess who he convinced to guarantee that loan. My parents secretly mortgaged their entire estate to back his failing venture. The trap was fully armed, and my family was sprinting directly into the jaws of destruction, happily spending my money along the way. Kendra pulled a velvet bar stool up to the marble island, her eyes locked on the glowing screen of my laptop. As a corporate litigator, she spent her days dissecting fraudulent contracts and exposing white-collar criminals. Watching her scan Derek's chaotic financial spreadsheets was like watching a hawk lock onto its prey. I handed her a fresh cup of coffee, sliding into the seat beside her. The spreadsheet I had pulled from Derek's unsecured cloud drive painted a pathetic picture of a man drowning in his own arrogance. He has been cooking the books, Kendra said, flatly pointing a manicured finger at a column labeled Projected Annual Recurring Revenue. He listed 3 major enterprise clients here as secured contracts. But look at these corresponding bank statements. No deposits have cleared from any of those companies in 6 months. He is running on fumes. Worse than fumes, I replied, typing a quick command to pull up a hidden subfolder I had decrypted earlier that morning. He is running on rejections. I opened a series of scanned documents. They were formal rejection letters from commercial lending departments. Chase Bank of America, Silicon Valley Bank. Every major financial institution had taken one look at his tech startup and slammed the door in his face. Derek had pitched them a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform, but the due diligence reports proved it was nothing more than a poorly coded algorithm wrapped in a slick marketing presentation. He was burning through cash paying for a flashy office space, expensive public relations firms, and lavish business dinners, all while producing zero actual product. "He is a fraud," Kendra stated, shaking her head in disgust. "Your parents treat him like the next Steve Jobs, and he cannot even secure a standard line of credit. If he goes bankrupt before the wedding, Brittany will lose her mind. She thinks she is marrying into a billionaire lifestyle." "Brittany only cares about the aesthetic of wealth," I said, clicking through another folder. "And Patricia only cares about bragging rights at the country club." They were so desperate to secure a tech chief executive officer for the golden child that they completely ignored the red flags. I warned my father 2 years ago that Derek lacked a solid business model. Richard told me I was just a bitter corporate drone who lacked visionary spirit. Kendra scoffed, her legal mind already putting the pieces together. "Well, this visionary spirit is about to hit a brick wall. He has zero liquidity. How is he paying for his office lease next week?" "That is exactly what I wanted to know," I murmured, navigating to the core ledger of his main operating account. I scrolled down to the most recent transaction history. For weeks, the account had hovered dangerously close to being overdrawn. Then exactly 28 days ago, the numbers suddenly spiked. Kendra leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "Wait, stop scrolling. What is that deposit right there?" I highlighted the row. It was a wire transfer. A massive influx of cash that had temporarily saved Derek from total collapse. $2 million deposited in a single lump sum. Where did a guy with no credit and a failing product get a $2 million bridge loan? Kendra asked, her tone shifting from disgusted to highly suspicious. No traditional bank would touch him. Private equity would demand a board seat and immediate restructuring. Who is reckless enough to hand him that kind of cash without oversight? I traced the routing number attached to the wire transfer. It led to an escrow account managed by a mid-tier law firm in Connecticut. The geography alone made my stomach tighten. I ran a quick search through public property records in the same county, cross-referencing Derek's name with recent legal filings. When the search results populated on the screen, the air in the kitchen suddenly felt very heavy. Kendra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Chelsea, tell me I am reading this wrong." "You are reading it perfectly right," I said, staring at the digital copy of a collateralized debt agreement. Attached to the $2 million loan was a secondary guarantor signature page. There, in stark black and white, were the digitally verified signatures of Patricia and Richard. They had not just co-signed for Derek. They had put up a tangible asset to secure the massive bridge loan. "They mortgaged the estate," Kendra whispered, horror mingling with disbelief. "Your parents secretly remortgaged the family house in Connecticut to back a failing startup." My mind raced back to all the times Patricia had paraded around that sprawling estate, calling it her crown jewel. She had hosted countless charity galas and holiday parties there, always making sure to remind everyone that the property had been in the family for generations. She loved that house more than she loved her own children. "They must have truly believed his lies about an upcoming initial public offering," I said, processing the sheer magnitude of their foolishness. Derek probably promised them a tenfold return on their investment within the year. They wanted to ride his coattails to a new tax bracket. They bet their entire generational wealth on a charismatic liar just to ensure Brittany married a supposed tech mogul, completely blinded by their own greed and vanity. Kendra shook her head, her litigator brain analyzing the legal ramifications. "If Derek defaults on this loan, the lender can seize the estate. Your parents will be homeless. They literally bet their house on a bad hand." "But who is the lender?" She pointed to the top of the loan agreement. The creditor was listed as Apollo Holdings, LLC. "It is a shell corporation," Kendra noted. "Standard practice for private lending." "But who issued the bridge loan? Who owns Apollo Holdings? I stared at the name on the screen. Apollo Holdings. A shiver of absolute chilling realization ran down my spine. I did not need to run a search to find the parent company. I did not need to dig through state registry files or consult a financial advisor. I knew exactly what that entity was because I created it. I slowly opened a new tab on my browser and logged into my own highly secure master terminal. The gateway required dual-factor authentication and a biometric scan. Once inside, I opened the corporate structural chart for my own venture capital firm. I navigated through the labyrinth of subsidiary funds, angel investment branches, and high-yield debt portfolios that I managed daily from this very penthouse. I scrolled down to the high-risk lending division, a sector we use to issue short-term high-interest bridge loans to desperate companies. There it was. Apollo Holdings, LLC. I sat back in my chair, the silence in the penthouse amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. Chelsea, Kendra asked gently, sensing the shift in my demeanor. What is it? Who owns the shell company? I turned my laptop slightly so Kendra could see the master structural chart. The top of the pyramid clearly displayed my name as the sole managing partner and majority shareholder of the parent fund. They bet their house on my fiance's company, I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. And they borrowed the money from me. 48 hours later, I walked into a private dining room at the Prime Steakhouse. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing. My parents, Patricia and Richard, had spared no expense on the tab I had been forced to guarantee. They sat flanking Brittany and Derek like royalty. I found my place card shoved at the very end of the table where the swinging kitchen doors blasted me with cold air. Kendra took the seat beside me, her sharp eyes scanning the room with utter disgust. She took a sip of her water and leaned in close. They put the woman paying for this entire circus next to the busboy station, Kendra muttered, her voice tight with anger. Watching them parade around on your dime is making my blood boil. I sliced into my steak with slow, deliberate precision. Let them enjoy the appetizers, Kendra. The main course is coming soon enough. At the head of the table, Brittany stood up. She tapped a spoon against her crystal flute, demanding attention. The chatter died down. Brittany smoothed her designer dress and beamed at the crowd. Derek and I want to thank you all for being here tonight, Brittany announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. As you know, we have a little miracle on the way. We want to make sure our baby grows up in the perfect environment. So we have some exciting news. Derek forced a smile, though I noticed a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He looked exhausted, the weight of his hidden bankruptcy clearly taking a physical toll on him. After we returned from our honeymoon, Brittany continued, Derek and I will be moving into Chelsea's Manhattan penthouse to prepare the nursery. Chelsea graciously offered her home to us because she knows she does not need all that space. It is the perfect place for our new family. A collective gasp of admiration rippled through the extended family. Several relatives turned to look at me, their faces glowing with approval at my supposed generosity. Kendra gripped her steak knife so hard her knuckles turned white. I simply placed my napkin on my lap, maintaining a perfectly neutral expression. Aunt Beatrice, a wealthy socialite from my mother's side of the family, leaned forward and adjusted her glasses. That is incredibly generous of you, Chelsea, Beatrice called out down the length of the table. A $3 million penthouse is quite a wedding gift. Are you sure you do not mind giving up your home? Before I could even open my mouth to respond, my father let out a booming theatrical laugh. Of course she does not mind, Richard declared loudly. Chelsea has always been happy to share with her little sister. Remember when she gave up that prestigious design scholarship so Brittany could study abroad in Paris? Chelsea has always been our little martyr. She loves taking care of her sister. My jaw tightened. I stared at my father, remembering the exact night he cornered me 10 years ago. I had won a full ride to a top design academy. Richard had threatened to cut off my health insurance unless I declined it, redirecting my college fund to pay for Brittany's frivolous trip to France. That is exactly right, Daddy. Brittany chimed in, wiping a fake tear from her eye. Chelsea just lives for her work anyway. She does not care about having a beautiful home as much as I do. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Every eye turned to me. Patricia glared silently, warning me not to cause a scene in front of her country club friends. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply picked up my designer clutch, unclasped the golden latch, and pulled out my heavy metallic penthouse keycard. I walked the entire length of the dining room, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the floorboards. I stopped right next to Brittany. I held the keycard directly over her crystal champagne flute. "You are absolutely right, Brittany," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the room. "You need that space much more than I do." I let go. The heavy metal keycard dropped into the tall glass, splashing champagne over the rim and onto the white tablecloth. "It is all yours," I whispered, smiling down at her. The table erupted into cheers and applause. Aunt Beatrice raised her glass to toast my incredible generosity. Patricia beamed, looking around the room to ensure everyone was admiring her perfectly managed family. Brittany shrieked with delight, hugging my father. But as the room celebrated my apparent surrender, I looked directly at Derek. He was not cheering. He was not smiling. Derek stared at the keycard at the bottom of the champagne glass like it was a live grenade. His face was the color of chalk. He knew he was completely bankrupt. He knew he had no money to pay the staggering monthly maintenance fees on a luxury Manhattan penthouse. He knew that accepting this grand gesture meant he would be exposed as a total fraud within weeks. The panic in his eyes was absolute. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I barely made it past the host stand when heavy footsteps rushed up behind me. A hand grabbed my arm, yanking me into the dimly lit hallway near the restrooms. Derek stood there, panting, his tie slightly askew. The arrogant tech founder was completely gone. In his place was a desperate, terrified rat backed into a corner. "What kind of game are you playing, Chelsea?" he hissed, his eyes darting frantically. "You know I cannot afford the property taxes on that place. I am completely out of cash." I stared at him, a cold smile forming slowly on my face. "You really should have thought about that before you decided to betray me. Now you get to face the consequences of your actions." Derek abruptly released my arm. He ran both hands through his hair, completely ruining the effortless aesthetic he spent hours cultivating. He looked up and down the hallway to ensure none of my family members had followed him out of the private dining room. The mask of the brilliant tech founder dissolved, revealing the panicked man underneath. He physically blocked my path to the exit, pressing his back against the heavy door. "Please, Chelsea," he begged, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have to take the keys back. Tell everyone it was a joke. Tell them there are zoning issues or legal restrictions. Anything. I cannot move Brittany into that penthouse. The monthly maintenance fees alone would bankrupt me in a week." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the patterned wallpaper. "You are already bankrupt, Derek." I saw the fear spike in his eyes. "I am not bankrupt," he shot back instinctively, though the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "We are just experiencing a temporary liquidity crisis. It is a cash flow bottleneck. My investors are restructuring their portfolios." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "A liquidity crisis? Is that what you call missing your last 2 payroll cycles? Is that what you call dodging phone calls from your cloud hosting providers because they are threatening to shut down your servers by Friday?" He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. "How do you know about payroll?" he whispered, looking around as if the walls were bugged. "I work in venture capital, Derek." I reminded him, keeping my tone conversational. "The tech world in this city is small. Word travels fast when a supposed unicorn cannot afford to pay its entry-level developers." He slumped against the door, all the fight draining out of him. He looked utterly defeated. "Chelsea, I am drowning," he confessed, the desperation raw and unfiltered. "My chief financial officer quit last week. The bank will not even return my calls. I have a $2 million bridge loan hanging over my head, and the lender is this faceless holding company that operates through a wall of lawyers. If I do not secure a restructuring meeting with them immediately, they are going to liquidate my entire company. And worse, they are going to seize your parents' estate." I kept my expression perfectly blank. My parents' estate. What a shame. Derek took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "You know people in this space. You have those boring corporate contacts you are always meeting with. You know, bankers, debt restructurers, managing partners. You could get me in the room with the people who hold my loan. You could vouch for me. Just get me a meeting, Chelsea. That is all I am asking. I stared at him, marveling at the sheer audacity. He was marrying my sister in less than 48 hours, yet he was begging me to use my professional reputation to save him from financial ruin. Why on earth would I do that for you? I asked calmly. Because of us. He said, his voice dropping into that low, intimate register he used to use when we were alone. He took another step forward, invading my personal space. He reached out, attempting to take my hand, but I smoothly stepped aside. He did not let the rejection stop him. He leaned in, deploying the psychological manipulation that had kept me trapped in our relationship for 3 years. Chelsea, you have to believe me, he pleaded, his eyes wide and earnest. I never wanted this wedding. I never wanted Brittany. I raised an eyebrow. You did not want the woman you were sleeping with in my bed. It was a mistake, he insisted, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I was stressed about the company. You were always working, always traveling for those mergers. I felt neglected. Brittany was just there feeding my ego. But when she got pregnant, your mother cornered me. Patricia threatened to destroy my reputation if I did not do the right thing and marry her. Richard told me he would pull his financial backing. They forced me into this, Chels. They trapped me. I listened to him spin his web of lies, shifting the blame onto my toxic parents, onto my demanding career, onto everyone except himself. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. I only agreed to marry her because I felt I had no choice, Derek whispered, stepping closer again. But I still love you, Chels. I never stopped loving you. You are the only one who actually understands me. You are the only one who sees my true potential. He paused, letting his words hang in the heavy air of the hallway. Then he delivered the ultimate sickening proposition. If you save my company, he said softly, looking deep into my eyes. If you get me that meeting and help me restructure this debt, I will call off the wedding. I will walk away from Brittany tomorrow. I will tell your parents to go to hell, and we can go back to the way things were. Just you and me. My stomach churned violently. A wave of pure nausea washed over me. He was standing there offering to abandon his pregnant bride at the altar in exchange for a corporate bailout. He was willing to sell my sister out for $2 million. It was the most repulsive thing I had ever witnessed, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to physically strike him. Instead, I forced a small smile. I reached out and adjusted his lapel. Derek exhaled, his shoulders dropping in absolute relief. He genuinely believed he had finally won. I already made a few calls, I told him very softly. Come to the Apex Tower tomorrow morning at exactly 8. Go to the top floor boardroom. The head of the firm will wait for you. Do not be late. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the frosted glass doors of the Apex Tower top floor slid open. Derek strutted into the executive reception area with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his own lies. I watched him on the security feed from my desk inside the main boardroom. He paused by the reflective glass wall to adjust his designer tie and run a hand through his hair, preparing to deploy his signature charm. He fully expected to walk into this meeting and dazzle some aging out-of-touch billionaire with buzzwords and fabricated user acquisition metrics. He pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom and stepped onto the plush carpet. I had intentionally turned my high-backed leather executive chair toward the floor to ceiling windows facing the breathtaking panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The morning sunlight poured into the room, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. Good morning, Derek, announced, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm as he dropped his leather briefcase onto the table. I am Derek, founder and chief executive officer. I appreciate you taking the time to meet on such short notice. I know my liaison set this up, but I can assure you that my platform is going to revolutionize the artificial intelligence sector. I placed my coffee cup on the windowsill. I gripped the armrests of my chair and slowly swiveled around to face him. Derek froze. His charismatic smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. He blinked a few times, looking past me toward the private office doors, expecting someone else to walk out. When no one did, a condescending smirk crept back onto his face. Chelsea, he chuckled, shaking his head as he unbuttoned his suit jacket and slouched into one of the guest chairs. What are you doing sitting in the big chair? Did your bosses make you come in early to set up the presentation? Look, I appreciate you pulling strings with your boring corporate contacts to get me in the room, but you really should go grab us some coffee before the managing partner gets here. I have a tight schedule today with the wedding rehearsal and everything. I did not smile. I did not blink. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, embodying the absolute authority I wielded in this building. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a sleek black legal folder. I dropped it onto the mahogany table with a heavy thud. No one else is coming, Derek, I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, authoritative pitch. I am the managing partner. I am the chairman of the board. And most importantly, I am the sole owner of Apollo Holdings, the shell corporation that issued your $2 million bridge loan last month. Derek stared at me. A harsh, barking laugh escaped his throat, but his eyes were darting nervously around the room. This is a good joke, Chelsea. Very funny. You almost had me. Now seriously, where is the portfolio manager? I need to restructure my debt covenants today. I slid the black folder across the polished wood. It stopped exactly an inch from his fingertips. Open it, I commanded. Derek hesitated. The arrogant smirk finally melted away, replaced by a creeping dread. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the cover. Sitting on top of the stack was a formal notice of default, printed on my venture capital firm's official letterhead. Attached to it was a detailed forensic audit of his startup's operating accounts. Your burn rate violated the financial covenants of the loan exactly 14 days ago, I stated, reciting the figures from memory. You spent $500,000 on an aggressive marketing campaign for a software product that does not even exist in beta testing. You missed your mandatory capital reserve threshold. You have zero incoming revenue from the 3 enterprise clients you listed on your loan application. As of midnight last night, your company is in legal default. I am calling in the loan. The color drained from Derek's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane and realized he forgot his parachute. He frantically flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the irrefutable evidence of his financial ruin. The bank statements, the bounced payroll checks, the rejected lines of credit. I had it all. You committed federal wire fraud? Derek, I continued, leaning forward. You submitted falsified accounts receivable documents across state lines to secure this capital. You claimed a partnership with a major logistics firm that was nothing more than a preliminary email exchange. I have the digital footprints, the server logs, and the sworn affidavits from your former chief financial officer who quit last week because he refused to go to federal prison for you. You... He stammered, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. You own Apollo Holdings. You approved the loan. But why would you give me the money if you knew I was struggling? Because you were desperate, I replied coldly. And desperate men sign stupid contracts. You were so eager to get your hands on that cash to impress my parents and keep up the illusion of your success for Brittany that you did not even read the secondary guarantor clause. Derek's eyes widened in absolute horror. The collateral, he whispered, his voice cracking. Yes, the collateral, I confirmed. Patricia and Richard secretly remortgaged the family estate to guarantee your loan. They bet their generational wealth on your fabricated success. And because you just defaulted, I now hold the legal right to foreclose on their property. You did not just bankrupt yourself, Derek. You bankrupted my parents. Panic morphed into feral, unhinged rage. Derek's face turned an ugly shade of crimson. You set me up, he snarled, slamming his fist onto the table. You bitter, jealous witch. You planned this because you could not handle the fact that I chose Brittany over you. I am going to tear up these fake documents and walk right out of here. You have nothing. He lunged across the massive mahogany table, his arms outstretched, desperately clawing at the black folder. He knocked over a crystal water pitcher, sending water and shattered glass cascading across the floor. He grabbed the notice of default, his fingers gripping the paper with wild, manic energy. fully believing that destroying the physical copy would somehow erase his digital footprint and save him from the abyss. Before he could rip the document in half, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a loud, authoritative crash. Derek froze, suspended halfway across the table, clutching the papers to his chest. Kendra strode into the room. She wore a sharp, tailored power suit, her heels striking the floor with commanding purpose. In her left hand, she carried a thick leather briefcase. In her right hand, she held up a digital audio recorder. The bright red light on the top of the device was blinking steadily, indicating that every word of Derek's explosive outburst had just been captured in high-definition audio. She stepped over the shattered crystal on the floor without even glancing down. As a seasoned corporate litigator, she had dismantled men far more powerful and far more intelligent than the pathetic fraud currently sprawled across my conference table. "Take a seat," Derek Kendra ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a steel blade. "My client has a proposal for you." Derek stared at Kendra. His chest heaved as his eyes darted from the blinking red light on her digital recorder to the shattered crystal covering the mahogany floor. He slowly sat down. His manic energy evaporated, replaced by the crushing realization that he was cornered. Kendra placed her briefcase on the table and snapped the brass locks open. She arranged a stack of legal documents with surgical precision. Her presence alone commanded the room. "Let us review the facts." Kendra began looking at him with absolute disdain. "You submitted fabricated accounts, receivable reports, to secure a $2 million bridge loan. You forged signatures from non-existent enterprise clients. Under federal law, that constitutes wire fraud. Transmitting these fraudulent documents across state lines to our New York servers carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Derek swallowed hard. He looked at me, his face glistening with cold sweat. "Chelsea, please. Give me a 30-day extension. I have investors lining up in Silicon Valley. You do not have to destroy my life over a temporary cash flow problem." I leaned forward. "You destroyed your own life the second you decided to lie to my firm," I replied calmly. "And you destroyed any chance of my mercy the second you decided to sleep with my sister in my bed." Kendra tapped her pen against the table. "The Department of Justice does not care about your personal life," Kendra stated. "We can hand this file to the authorities right now. Federal investigators will freeze your assets, raid your office, and escort you out in handcuffs before lunchtime. Brittany will find out she is marrying a broke felon. Patricia will be humiliated in front of her country club." Derek flinched at the mention of Patricia and Brittany. The thought of losing his wealthy facade terrified him more than the threat of federal prison. He rubbed his temples. Patricia would drop him instantly if she found out his billionaire persona was a fabrication. His survival depended on making it down the aisle on Saturday to secure his legal tie to my family. "What do you want me to do?" Derek asked, his voice barely a whisper. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal addendum to his bridge loan contract. "This is a debt restructuring agreement," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "It temporarily suspends the default notices. It buys you enough time to make it through your wedding on Saturday without the police kicking down your door. You get to keep your secret. You get to play the successful tech founder for Brittany and my parents." Derek snatched the paper, scanning it with desperate hope. He read the first clauses, his shoulders relaxing. He saw the words "temporary suspension" and assumed he had manipulated his way out of disaster. He pulled out a silver fountain pen. "But there is a catch," Kendra interrupted smoothly before he could sign. Derek froze, the tip of his pen hovering just above the signature line. "What catch?" "Look at Section 4, Paragraph B," Kendra instructed. Derek scanned down the page, his brow furrowed as he read the legal jargon. I watched the realization hit him. The blood drained from his face all over again. "This is an immediate repayment clause," Derek sputtered. "This gives you the right to call in the entire $2 million loan at your sole discretion. You could trigger this the second I sign it. You are asking me to hand you a loaded gun." "I am asking you to choose your executioner," I corrected him coldly. If you refuse to sign, Kendra goes straight to the federal prosecutor. You will go to jail today. Brittany cancels the wedding. Your life ends right here, right now. I watched his mind race through his non-existent options. Or you can sign the addendum. You walk out a free man. You get to stand at the altar on Saturday. You get to keep your pathetic pride for a few more days. I hold the power to destroy you, but you get to breathe until I decide to pull the trigger. Derek stared at the paper. His hand was shaking violently. He knew it was a trap. He knew I was going to ruin him. But he was a coward, and cowards always choose short-term survival over long-term consequences. He needed to lock down his marriage to Brittany, banking on the delusional hope that my parents would bail him out once he was part of the family. Gritting his teeth, he signed his name with a jagged scrawl. He pushed the document back across the table with a vicious sneer. "You think you are so smart, Chelsea?" Derek spat, standing up and straightening his ruined tie. "You think you have me backed into a corner. But you are forgetting one massive detail. I am completely broke. My failing company has nothing left to liquidate. When you trigger that repayment clause, I cannot pay you." He leaned over the table, a venomous glint returning to his eyes. "If I default, the bank goes after the secondary guarantors." Derek reminded me, his voice dripping with malice. "Your parents put up their precious family estate as collateral. They bet their entire legacy on me. So go ahead, trigger the clause whenever you want. Call in the debt, ruin my company. But know this, if I go down, Patricia and Richard go down with me, you will be rendering your own parents homeless just to get back at me." I slowly picked up the signed legal contract, ensuring the ink was completely dry. I slipped the heavy paper into my leather folder and closed it with a satisfying snap. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I met his arrogant glare with a cold, unforgiving smile that made him take a physical step backward toward the heavy boardroom doors. I am counting on exactly that. The morning of the wedding arrived with a torrential downpour outside, but inside the bridal suite at the elite country club, the only storm was my mother. I stood in the corner of the lavishly decorated room, gripping the handle of a heavy commercial garment steamer. Hot steam billowed around me as I carefully worked the deep wrinkles out of the wedding dress hanging from a brass ceiling hook. It was my dress, a custom silk creation I had flown to Milan to design 6 months ago. Patricia had simply taken it from my closet on Wednesday and paid an exorbitant rush fee to a local tailor to hack it apart. They had lowered the neckline for Brittany and let out the delicate waistline to accommodate the baby she claimed to be carrying. Watching my sister lounge on a velvet chaise while staring at the butchered remains of my bridal gown should have broken me completely. Instead, it only sharpened my focus. Brittany sighed loudly, thrusting her empty champagne flute toward one of her bridesmaids. "Chelsea, you missed a huge spot near the train," Brittany complained, adjusting her silk robe. "Honestly, if you had just bought a traditional ball gown, this would have been so much easier to alter. Your taste is just too stiff. Derek likes things with a little more flow anyway." I did not react to the deliberate provocation. I simply moved the steamer over the silk fabric, smoothing out the imperfections. "I will make sure it is flawless for your walk down the aisle, Brittany." The double doors swung open and Patricia marched into the suite. She was already wearing her mother of the bride gown, a shimmering silver number that looked entirely too much like a wedding dress itself. She held a thick clipboard, barking harsh orders at the wedding coordinator lingering out in the hallway. Patricia turned her sharp gaze to the room. Her eyes scanned past Brittany and locked directly onto my chest. I was wearing a simple navy bridesmaid dress, but around my neck rested our late grandmother's antique diamond heirloom necklace. My grandmother had given it to me on her deathbed, explicitly stating it belonged to the only woman in the family who actually knew the value of hard work. Patricia dropped her clipboard on a velvet ottoman. She marched across the room, her designer heels digging into the plush carpet. Without a single word of warning, her hands were at the nape of my neck. Her manicured nails dug sharply into my skin as she forcefully unclasped the heavy diamond piece. "What are you doing wearing this?" Patricia demanded, holding the glittering diamonds up to the chandelier light. "This is a bridal piece. It is entirely inappropriate for a bridesmaid to try and outshine the bride today. Grandma gave that directly to me, Mom, I said, keeping my voice dangerously even. She wanted me to wear it on my wedding day. Today is your wedding day, Patricia sneered, her voice dripping with pure venom. At least it is the wedding you are paying for. But this necklace belongs to the bride, the one who is actually providing an heir to this family. You never appreciated family tradition anyway, Chelsea. You only care about your spreadsheets and your bank accounts. Patricia walked over to Brittany and fastened the diamonds around her neck. Brittany turned toward the gilded floor-to-ceiling mirror, admiring her reflection. She ran her fingers over the precious gems, smiling victoriously. Mom is right, Chelsea, Brittany purred. It sits perfectly with this altered neckline. You can borrow my fake pearls if your neck feels too bare for the photos. Before I could formulate a response, the heavy suite doors opened again. Jason walked in. My older brother was dressed in his tailored groomsman tuxedo. Unlike my parents, Jason possessed a highly functioning moral compass, largely thanks to his marriage to Kendra. He took one look at the scene unfolding in the room. He saw me holding the garment steamer for the woman who stole my fiancé, and he saw our grandmother's necklace sparkling against Brittany's chest. His jaw clenched tight, a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. He marched straight past Patricia and grabbed my wrist, pulling me violently away from the dress. "Jason, what are you doing?" Patricia barked, stepping forward. "Chelsea needs to finish steaming the train before the photographer gets here." Jason completely ignored our mother. He dragged me into the adjoining private bathroom and slammed the heavy oak door shut, locking the deadbolt behind us. The sound of Brittany complaining about his rudeness was instantly muffled by the thick wood. Jason turned to me, his eyes blazing with a chaotic mixture of raw fury and profound heartbreak. He kept his voice to an urgent, furious whisper. "Kendra told me everything last night," Jason hissed, pacing the small marble floor. "Every single detail." I maintained steady eye contact, my expression completely unreadable. I told her to keep it confidential. Confidential! Jason growled, gripping the edges of the marble vanity. "Chelsea Derrick is completely bankrupt. He is a criminal fraud. Mom and Dad secretly mortgaged the family estate to back his worthless company, and you hold the debt." Kendra showed me the default notices. "I know he tried to manipulate you in the hallway yesterday. I know this entire wedding is a catastrophic financial scam." He reached for the bathroom door handle, his knuckles turning white. "I am not letting you do this. I am not letting you stand out there and be humiliated by these parasites for another second. I am walking out there right now. I am dragging Derek out of the groom suite by his throat, and I am telling every single guest in that ballroom that this wedding is a massive sham." I stepped rapidly in front of the door, placing both of my hands flat against the polished wood. I physically blocked his exit. "No, Jason," I said softly, but with absolute, undeniable authority. He stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Chelsea, they are using you. Mom just ripped our grandmother's necklace off your throat to give to the sister who slept with your fiancé. Why are you protecting them?" "I am not protecting anyone!" I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. I reached up and adjusted his crooked tuxedo bow tie, smoothing the black silk with steady fingers. "If you blow this up right now, Derek will just run away. Mom and Dad will deny everything and call us crazy. Brittany will play the victim. They will find a way to wriggle out of the financial ruin. Let them put on the white dress. Let them walk down that aisle and smile for the cameras." I looked deeply into my brother's eyes, watching the realization slowly dawn on his face. The trap is not shut until they say I do. The grand ballroom of the elite country club had been transformed into a lavish floral wonderland. Thousands of imported white orchids and cascading hydrangeas hung from the vaulted ceilings, filling the space with an overwhelming, heavy perfume. Every single bloom, every crystal goblet, every velvet-draped chair had been paid for by my clearing account. I took my assigned seat in the second row, strategically positioned behind a massive floral pillar that partially obstructed my view of the altar. My mother, Patricia, had undoubtedly arranged the seating chart to keep me out of the direct line of sight for the official ceremony photographs. She wanted the illusion of a perfect family, and my presence was a jagged crack in her carefully curated facade. Kendra slid into the empty chair right beside me. She wore a stunning emerald green sheath dress that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin, her posture radiating absolute professional menace. As a brilliant corporate litigator, she understood the exact mechanics of the trap we had set. She held her phone discreetly in her lap, her thumb rhythmically tapping the screen as she monitored the incoming encrypted emails from our legal team. On the groom's side of the altar, my brother Jason took his place as a groomsman. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter. He refused to look at Derek, keeping his eyes fixed rigidly on the back wall. The string quartet, a highly sought-after ensemble I had personally vetted and hired months ago, struck up the opening chords of the bridal chorus. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the hall swung open with dramatic flair. Richard escorted Brittany down the white runner. She was wearing my custom silk gown. The expensive fabric was straining slightly around her altered waistline to accommodate the pregnancy she had used as her ultimate trump card. Around her neck, our grandmother's antique diamond heirloom caught the light from the crystal chandeliers sparkling with a stolen, bitter brilliance. She beamed at the audience, soaking in the admiration of the high society guests Patricia had invited to witness this fraudulent spectacle. Derek stood at the altar, sweating profusely in his tailored tuxedo. He looked like a man walking directly toward a firing squad, rather than a groom awaiting his beautiful bride. His eyes darted toward me for a fraction of a second, silently begging for some confirmation that our secret boardroom deal was secure. I gave him absolutely nothing. My face remained a perfectly unreadable mask carved from ice. I simply watched as my father handed my sister over to the man who had shared my bed just 72 hours prior. Richard patted Derek on the shoulder, completely unaware that he was blessing the man who had just bankrupted his entire generational estate. The priest stepped up to the podium and began the traditional welcoming remarks. He spoke at length about loyalty, unwavering devotion, and the sacred, unbreakable bond of matrimony. Every word felt like a deliberate, cruel mockery of the reality unfolding in front of us. Patricia sat in the front row, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed lace handkerchief, playing the role of the overwhelmed, joyful mother to absolute perfection. She occasionally cast warning glances over her shoulder at me, silently daring me to disrupt her flawless production. The air in the room grew thick and heavy as the ceremony approached its most critical juncture. Many of the guests in attendance were well aware of the sudden scandalous change in the wedding party. The whispers had circulated through the country club all week like a raging wildfire. They knew I was the original bride. They knew Brittany had usurped my place at the last possible minute. The collective anticipation was suffocating. They were all sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The priest cleared his throat, his voice projecting clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Should anyone present know of any reason that this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The entire room seemingly stopped breathing. 300 heads turned almost simultaneously to stare directly at me in the second row. The string quartet players lowered their bows. Even the priest looked slightly uncomfortable, his eyes shifting toward where I sat in the shadows of the floral arrangement. The silence stretched out thick, heavy, and agonizing, lasting a full 10 seconds. No one dared to move a muscle. Patricia twisted around in her front row seat, the color completely draining from her face under her heavy layers of makeup. She glared at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, silent threat. She fully expected me to stand up. She expected me to scream, to cry, to hurl bitter accusations at the altar, and ruin her immaculate social event. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his stiff collar, his hands shaking at his sides. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my legs elegantly, and offered my mother a polite, serene smile. I slowly shook my head from side to side. I had no objections. I wanted this union to proceed more than anyone else in the room. Patricia exhaled a massive shaky breath and turned back around her shoulders, dropping in profound relief. She actually thought she had won. She thought I had finally accepted my place as the defeated submissive scapegoat of the family. The priest continued guiding Derek and Brittany through their vows. They promised to love and cherish each other in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. The irony of those traditional words was almost too sweet to bear. Derek's voice shook as he pledged his eternal devotion, his mind undoubtedly racing with the terrifying reality of his massive financial default. Brittany spoke her vows with dramatic, theatrical flair, loud enough to ensure the videographer captured every syrupy, dishonest word for her social media followers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest declared. "You may kiss the bride." Derek leaned in and kissed my sister, sealing the ultimate betrayal in front of hundreds of witnesses. The audience erupted into polite, relieved applause. Patricia leaped to her feet, cheering the loudest of them all, clapping her hands together in sheer victory. But the ceremony was not officially over. The priest directed them to the small, ornate side table situated right on the altar. This was the moment that truly mattered. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for all week. The signing of the legal marriage license. Derek picked up the ceremonial gold pen. His hand trembled slightly as he signed his name on the dotted line. He handed the pen to Brittany. She eagerly scrawled her signature next to his, grinning brightly for the cameras flashing rapidly in front of them. By signing that specific document under the strict financial laws of our state, Brittany and Derek officially merged their legal and financial identities. They became a single entity in the eyes of the law. Every single dollar of debt Derek carried, every defaulted corporate loan, every instance of wire fraud was now legally bound to my sister. She had just tethered herself to a sinking ship made of lead. Kendra leaned over to me, her shoulder brushing against mine. She did not look at the cheering crowd or the celebrating parents hugging at the altar. She looked down at the glowing screen of her phone, where a secure confirmation text had just appeared from our legal team. "The ink is dry," Kendra whispered, a razor-sharp smile curving her lips as she looked up at the newlyweds. "The sheriff's deputies are on standby." The grand ballroom doors swung open to reveal the reception area, a sprawling, magnificent display of wealth that I had entirely financed out of my own pocket. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 30 tables draped in imported silk. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. The jazz band I hired was already playing upbeat swing music, setting the tone for what was supposed to be the social event of the season. Richard and Patricia immediately began working the room, their champagne flutes clinking against those of wealthy local politicians. My parents were in their element, boasting to anyone who would listen about their brilliant tech chief executive officer's son-in-law taking his artificial intelligence company public. Patricia was right beside him, proclaiming that Brittany would never have to work a day in her life because Derek provided an incredible financial safety net. They were selling a fantasy, completely oblivious to the fact that the man they were praising was legally bankrupt and tied to them through a fraudulent loan. As the guests began finding their assigned seats, I walked toward the front of the room where the immediate family was traditionally placed. Kendra and Jason had already been seated at table 4, positioned awkwardly near the exit doors, a clear punishment for their vocal opposition to this wedding. I scanned the place cards at the elevated head table: Derek, Brittany, Patricia, Richard, and the bridal party. My name was nowhere to be found. I kept walking. I checked table 2. I checked table 3. I moved further back into the ballroom, passing tables filled with distant cousins, Richard's golf buddies, and Patricia's country club acquaintances. Still no place card for me. Finally, I reached the absolute back of the cavernous ballroom. Behind a massive pillar blocking any view of the head table sat a cheap folding table for vendors. The audio-visual crew and 2 backup catering staff were sitting there, eating wilted salads from plastic containers. Right in the middle of them, wedged between a tangled mess of extension cords, sat a small piece of folded cardstock reading "Chelsea guest." Patricia had physically hidden me behind a concrete pillar alongside the hired help at the wedding I had paid for. She wanted me entirely out of sight, effectively erased from Brittany's perfect night. I stood there staring at the little white card. A shadow fell across the table. I turned to see Aunt Brenda, Patricia's older sister, clutching a glass of red wine. Brenda wore a gaudy sequined dress, and the same perpetual expression of superiority that my mother possessed. She had always delighted in pointing out my supposed flaws. Brenda reached out and patted my shoulder with a painfully condescending smile. "It is so brave of you to show up tonight, dear," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for the audio crew to hear. Not everyone could watch their sister take their life and just stand there quietly. You have always been such a good sport about taking a back seat to Brittany. I suppose you are used to it by now. Maybe if you spent less time in corporate boardrooms and more time at the gym, you could find a nice middle management guy of your own someday. Someone safe, someone who does not mind playing second fiddle to a powerful family like ours. I looked at Brenda. I looked at the plastic folding table. I looked across the vast ballroom toward the elevated head table where Brittany was currently feeding Derek a strawberry while Patricia snapped photos with her phone. They genuinely believed I was broken. They believed that taking my fiancé, draining my bank accounts, and shoving me behind a pillar was my natural place in this world. They thought I would just sit down, eat my cold salad, and watch them celebrate my humiliation. I did not pull out the flimsy metal folding chair. I did not sit down. I slowly unzipped my designer clutch. I reached inside and let my fingers graze the thick, heavy cardstock of a sleek black envelope. It was sealed with a gold wax stamp. Inside that envelope rested the absolute destruction of every single lie currently being celebrated in this room. I pulled the black envelope out. I gripped it tightly in my right hand. I turned my back on Aunt Brenda, leaving her speechless. I walked past the vendor table. I walked past the distant cousins. I walked past the country club executives and the local politicians. I took my time, letting the heavy anticipation build with every single step I took toward the front of the massive room. Kendra caught my eye from table 4. She gave me a single sharp nod. Jason sat up straight, crossing his arms, bracing for the impact. I walked directly past the head table. Brittany looked down at me from her elevated seat, a smug, victorious grin stretching across her face. Derek avoided my gaze, nervously adjusting his collar. Patricia quickly stood up from her chair, her eyes widening in panic as she realized I was not heading for a microphone stand on the floor to give a quiet, easily ignored toast. I bypassed the floor level entirely and stepped onto the main entertainment stage. The jazz band looked at me in confusion. I walked straight over to the audio technician manning the main soundboard. I tapped the large master volume slider and signaled the DJ by dragging my finger across my throat. "Cut the music," I ordered. The technician blinked, intimidated by the absolute ice in my tone, and immediately pulled the slider down. The upbeat swing music stopped with a harsh, echoing screech. The sudden deafening silence washed over the ballroom. 300 guests stopped talking, their forks hovering over their plates. Every single face in the room turned toward the main stage, staring directly at me as I stepped up to the center microphone. I grabbed the heavy metal stand, gripping the microphone firmly with both hands. I took a deep breath, feeling the power of the moment surge through my veins. The time for hiding in shadows was over. I was finally ready to burn this entire toxic charade to the ground. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the power of the moment surge strongly through my veins. The time for hiding in shadows was over. I was finally ready to burn this entire toxic charade to the ground. The deafening absolute silence hung over the grand ballroom like a heavy physical weight. 300 pairs of eyes remained glued to me. I stood center stage, bathed in the harsh white glare of the spotlight. Down on the floor, the illusion of the perfect country club wedding shattered instantly. My mother, Patricia, shoved her chair backward. It tipped over and crashed onto the polished marble floor. She did not even flinch. She stormed toward the stage, her silver mother of the bride dress catching the light as she moved with ferocious speed. Her face contorted with absolute rage. "Chelsea, get down from there right now," Patricia hissed. She stood at the base of the stage, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice was kept low, a desperate attempt to contain the scandal, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "Do not you dare ruin your sister's night. Get back to your table before I have security throw you out." I looked down at her. For 33 years, I had obeyed that tone. I had shrunk myself to fit into the tiny, invisible boxes she built for me. I had funded their luxury lifestyle, fixed their endless mistakes, and swallowed their daily insults. but looking at her panicked, angry face now, I felt absolutely nothing but cold resolve. I did not step back. I stepped closer to the edge of the wooden stage. "You do not give orders here tonight, Mom," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly without the microphone. "Security works for the person who signed their paychecks, and we both know whose signature is on those checks." Patricia froze. The color drained from her cheeks as the reality of her financial dependence slapped her across the face. She looked around nervously, realizing that several nearby tables were actively listening to our exchange. "Richard." My father finally stood up from the head table. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo jacket, projecting his usual false authority, and began striding toward his wife to run damage control. I did not wait for him to arrive. I turned my attention to the microphone resting in the heavy iron stand. I reached out and tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, percussive thud echoed through the massive ballroom speakers, startling the guests in the back rows. "Good evening, everyone," I announced. My voice resonated with absolute chilling clarity across the vast space. "Please keep your seats. I promise not to take up too much of your time. But since I paid $150,000 for this beautiful reception, I thought it was only fitting that I give the first toast." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The wealthy politicians, the country club socialites, and my father's business partners immediately started whispering to one another. In high society, discussing the explicit cost of an event was the ultimate taboo. Admitting that the scapegoat sister funded the lavish spectacle completely destroyed the wealthy facade my parents had spent decades cultivating. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He glared at me, his eyes promising severe retribution, but he was completely trapped. He could not drag me off the stage without causing an unrecoverable public scene. I shifted my gaze to the elevated head table. Brittany sat in my altered custom silk gown. She had initially looked panicked when I grabbed the microphone, but the moment I mentioned money, her expression shifted back to pure, unadulterated entitlement. She crossed her arms over her chest and leaned back in her velvet chair. A smug smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She genuinely believed this was a public surrender. She thought I was standing up here to announce a massive financial gift, a desperate attempt to buy my way back into the family's good graces. Next to her, Derek looked like a man standing on the gallows. He was sweating profusely. His eyes darted from me to the exits and back again. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He knew this was not a surrender. He knew exactly what kind of monster was hiding behind my calm demeanor. Weddings are a time of transition. I continued pacing slowly across the stage, maintaining eye contact with the head table. They represent the merging of two lives, two families, and most importantly, two financial portfolios. When my sister stepped in to take my place at the altar today, she did not just take my fiancé, she took on his entire future, and I have a very special wedding gift for the newlyweds to help them start that future. Brittany uncrossed her arms and leaned forward eagerly. She glanced at Patricia, who had stopped hissing and was now watching me with cautious, greedy anticipation. They were all waiting for the check. They were waiting for me to hand over a small fortune so they could continue funding their delusions of grandeur. I stopped pacing. I stood dead center on the stage. I raised my right hand, holding up the sleek black envelope sealed with gold wax. The dark paper starkly contrasted with the bright stage lights. "This is not a check, Brittany," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, predatory pitch. "This envelope holds the absolute truth. It holds the reality of the man you just married. It holds the future of your marriage, your finances, and your entire life." I watched the greedy smile completely vanish from Brittany's face. Confusion set in, followed rapidly by apprehension. She looked at Derek for reassurance, but Derek was staring at the black envelope with wide, terrified eyes. He looked like he was about to vomit right onto the silk tablecloth. Down at table 4, I saw my sister-in-law Kendra lean forward, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. A fierce, proud smile illuminated her beautiful face. My brother Jason sat beside her, his arms crossed, watching the destruction of the golden child with grim satisfaction. They knew exactly what was inside that envelope. They had helped me pack the ammunition. I slowly broke the solid gold wax seal with my thumb. The sharp crack of the wax breaking seemed to echo through the silent ballroom. I reached inside and pulled out the first stack of legal documents. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. "Let us start with your brand new home, Brittany." I slid my perfectly manicured thumbnail under the flap of the black envelope. The crisp sound of heavy paper tearing echoed through the silent ballroom. Everyone watched my hands with the kind of morbid fascination reserved for a multi-car pileup. Down at the head table, Brittany shifted uncomfortably in the custom silk wedding gown that was supposed to be mine. Her hands gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles white. She still expected a grand gesture, maybe a deed transfer, or a set of solid gold keys. She had spent her entire 30 years being rewarded for her terrible behavior, and her brain simply could not process the impending reality of consequences. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. I held the first page up to the harsh stage lights. Earlier this week at the rehearsal dinner, I started my voice echoing across the floral centerpieces and crystal chandeliers. Brittany proudly announced to our entire family that she and Derek would be moving into my $3 million Manhattan penthouse. She told you all that I had graciously offered my home so she could prepare a nursery for her new baby. She claimed I was always so willing to share with my little sister. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The country club's socialites and wealthy executives leaned forward in their velvet chairs, completely captivated by the unfolding drama. Patricia stood frozen at the base of the stage, her face a mask of absolute terror. She knew my tone. She knew I was not playing her game anymore. It was a beautiful story. I continued pacing slowly across the wooden stage. It painted the perfect picture of family unity and sisterly sacrifice. There is just one minor problem with that narrative. What Brittany did not know, and what my parents conveniently ignored, is that my penthouse is not a family charity fund. It is an asset. And yesterday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, I sold that asset to a foreign real estate investor. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of shocked gasps. Wealthy guests covered their mouths, their eyes darting between me on the stage and Brittany at the head table. Brittany shot out of her chair. The heavy silk fabric of her stolen dress knocked over her crystal champagne flute. The glass shattered against the floor, spilling expensive vintage champagne across the white table linens. "You are lying!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with sudden raw panic. Her perfectly contoured face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You cannot sell that apartment. My interior decorator already took measurements for the nursery. I ordered custom Italian furniture. My things are already there." I smiled. It was a cold, surgical expression that made my father Richard physically recoil from his seat. "I am glad you brought up your things, Brittany," I said, pulling a glossy 8x10 color photograph from the back of the document stack. I held the photograph high above my head for the entire ballroom to see. The new owner took legal possession of the property at noon today. According to New York State real estate law, any unauthorized personal property left in a transferred residence is considered abandoned garbage. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the stage, looking directly down into my sister's horrified eyes. "The management company was very thorough," I explained, making sure my voice projected with crystal clear diction. "All of your designer clothes, those limited edition handbags you bought with our parents, credit cards, your custom shoes, and the expensive maternity wear you moved in early. They are currently sitting in heavy-duty, black contractor trash bags on the Manhattan curb. The sanitation department is scheduled to pick them up at dawn." A collective shudder went through the high society crowd. For these people, losing designer items to a garbage truck was a visceral, horrifying image. Aunt Beatrice, who had mocked me just an hour ago, covered her face with her hands. The absolute humiliation of the golden child was being broadcast live in front of the exact audience Patricia cared about most. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless cry. She grabbed the edge of the stage, her manicured nails digging into the wood. "Chelsea, stop this right now," she commanded, though her voice shook with undeniable fear. "You are embarrassing the family. You will buy her new clothes. You will buy her a new house. You have the money. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable bank account. I do not owe this family a single dime, I stated flatly. My charity era ended the second I found my fiancé in my bed. Brittany began hyperventilating. Her chest heaved against the tight silk bodice of her dress. The reality of losing her luxurious Manhattan fantasy was finally breaking through her delusions. She looked wildly around the ballroom, seeing the pity and judgment in the eyes of her wealthy friends. She could not handle the public degradation. She needed a savior. She needed the narrative to shift back in her favor. She spun around and grabbed Derek by the lapels of his custom tuxedo. Derek had been sitting completely paralyzed, staring at the floor, sweating through his expensive shirt. "Tell her to stop," Brittany screamed, shaking him violently. "Tell her we do not need her stupid apartment. You are a tech chief executive officer. You are a visionary. Tell her we will just buy a better house with your startup money. We will buy a $5 million brownstone. Tell her Derek." Derek did not speak. He could not even look at his new bride. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, his entire body trembling as the impending doom wrapped its icy fingers around his throat. He knew exactly what was coming next. I watched my sister desperately cling to the false idol my parents had worshipped. My smile widened into a sharp, predatory grin. I tapped the microphone, drawing the entire room's attention back to the stage. "Ah, yes," I said, my voice dripping with lethal anticipation. "Derek's startup money. Let us talk about that." I did not give anyone a single second to recover from the shock of the eviction announcement. The grand ballroom was already buzzing with a frantic, chaotic energy. I turned my back to the bewildered crowd and walked directly over to the audio technician. The young man was trembling, his hands hovering nervously over the master control board. I held out my left hand. "Hand me the auxiliary cable," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy tension on the stage. He did not hesitate. He scrambled to untangle a thick black cord and quickly handed it over to me. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket and plugged the cable directly into the device. A sharp crackle of static popped through the massive ballroom speakers, commanding immediate attention from every single guest. I turned back to face the audience, my eyes locking onto my sister and the man she had just married. Before we discussed Derek's billions, I announced, ensuring every syllable carried to the farthest corners of the room. "Let us hear what the groom really thinks of his new bride." I tapped the play button on my screen. I had cranked the volume up to maximum. The audio recording began to play crisp and undeniable. Derek's voice filled the cavernous room, sounding desperate and pathetic as he had cornered me outside the restroom just 2 nights ago. His words echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "I only agreed to marry her because I felt I had no choice." The entire ballroom gasped in unison. Brittany's jaw dropped open. Derek's voice continued, broadcasting his treacherous lies for everyone to hear. "Patricia threatened to destroy my reputation if I did not do the right thing and marry her. Richard told me he would completely pull his financial backing immediately. They forced me into this." The recording of Derek pleaded loudly. "But I still love you. I never stopped loving you." The recording did not stop there. The worst was yet to come. Derek's voice echoed with sickening clarity as he made his final desperate bargain. "If you save my company, if you get me that meeting and help me restructure this debt, I will call off the wedding. I will walk away from Brittany tomorrow. I will tell your parents to go to hell, and we can go back to the way things were. Just you and me alone." I tapped the screen, pausing the audio. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 guests were frozen in sheer disbelief. The wealthy politicians, the elite socialites, the business partners who had just spent the last hour congratulating my parents on their perfect new son-in-law, all stared at the head table in utter horror. Then the ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The quiet whispers morphed into a deafening roar of scandalized shouts. Brittany snapped. She let out a blood-curdling shriek that tore through the room. She dropped her bouquet of imported white orchids onto the silk tablecloth. She lunged across the elevated head table. The heavy silk of my altered wedding dress tore at the seams as she threw her entire body weight at Derek. She swung her arm back and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap directly across his face. The sharp smack of her hand striking his cheek was loud enough to be heard over the rising uproar. "How could you?" she screamed, grabbing him by the lapels of his custom tuxedo and shaking him violently. "You lied to me. You promised me we were building an empire. You told me that you loved me." Derek stumbled backward, desperately trying to protect his face from her frantic blows. He knocked over a towering floral centerpiece, sending glass and water crashing onto the floor. "It is a fake!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic as he tried to pry Brittany's manicured nails off his lapels. "It is a fabrication. She used artificial intelligence to fake my voice. She is trying to ruin us because she is jealous." But nobody believed him. The desperation in the recording had been too raw, too authentic to be faked. Patricia finally snapped out of her frozen, shocked state. The reality of her entire social universe collapsing around her propelled her into frantic action. She hiked up the skirt of her silver mother of the bride gown and charged toward the stage like a cornered animal. Her eyes were wild with desperation. She realized the only way to stop this nightmare was to physically disconnect my phone from the sound system. "Chelsea, give me that phone right now!" Patricia screeched, scrambling up the wooden steps of the stage. She reached out her hands, clawing desperately toward the audio board to rip the thick black cord out of the console. She was hyperventilating, her perfect makeup now stark against her pale, panicked face. But before her fingers could even graze the wires, a tall figure vaulted onto the stage. It was my older brother, Jason. He had spent his entire life watching Patricia excuse Brittany's toxic behavior and tear me down. He had reached his absolute limit. Jason stepped directly in front of the audio technician's booth. He planted his feet wide and crossed his arms over his chest, turning his body into an impenetrable physical barrier between our mother and the sound system. "Move out of my way immediately." Away. Jason, Patricia shrieked, slamming her fists against his solid chest. "She is destroying everything. We have to stop the music. We have to shut it down." Jason did not budge an inch. He looked down at the woman who had sold her own daughter into a fraudulent marriage just to maintain appearances at the country club. His expression was a mixture of profound disgust and unwavering resolve. He gently but firmly grabbed both of Patricia's wrists, stopping her frantic assault. "Let her finish." Jason growled, his voice vibrating with a dark, terrifying intensity as he stared his own mother down. Jason held Patricia in a vice grip. My mother thrashed against his hold, her silver heels slipping on the polished marble floor. She demanded he let her go, shrieking that I was destroying the family name. Jason simply tightened his grip and shoved her gently but immovably back toward the head table. For the first time in his life, my brother refused to be a passive spectator to her tyranny. The wealthy guests seated at the tables closest to the stage began to whisper frantically. Politicians and corporate executives exchanged alarmed glances, realizing they were trapped in the middle of a catastrophic public scandal. Up at the head table, Derek pushed himself off the floor. A thick line of dark red blood trickled from his lower lip where Brittany had slapped him. He wiped it away with the back of his trembling hand, smearing crimson across his pristine white tuxedo shirt. He stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the elevated table, his chest heaving as he stared out at the sea of horrified faces. The charismatic tech founder persona was completely shattered, but he desperately tried to stitch it back together. "This is a setup!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking loudly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Do not listen to a single word she says. That audio recording is entirely fabricated. She used artificial intelligence to clone my voice. It is a deepfake." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. In the age of modern technology, the excuse was just plausible enough to make a few older guests hesitate. Derek saw that momentary doubt and lunged at the opportunity. "She is a bitter, jealous woman," Derek yelled, wiping more blood from his mouth. "She could not handle the fact that I fell in love with her sister. She works in corporate finance. She has access to cutting-edge software. She generated that audio file to frame me because she wants to ruin our wedding day. I would never say those things about my wife. I looked over at Brittany. She stood frozen, clutching the torn bodice of her silk dress. For a fraction of a second, I saw a desperate glimmer of hope flash in her eyes. She wanted to believe his ridiculous lie. She needed to believe it. Her entire identity, her influencer lifestyle, and her country club status depended on Derek being a billionaire visionary. Admitting that she had married a scheming fraud was a reality her fragile ego simply could not process. She took a tiny step toward him, her hands trembling. I did not give her the chance to fall back into his trap. I did not bother arguing with Derek. I did not defend the authenticity of the recording. Arguing with a narcissist is a total waste of oxygen. I simply reached back into the sleek black envelope. I pulled out the next stack of heavy legal documents. I held them up high, the stark white paper catching the harsh glare of the stage spotlight. You can try to blame artificial intelligence for your complete lack of a moral compass. Derek, I announced, my voice echoing with glacial authority over the sound system. But you cannot blame artificial intelligence for your bank statements. I stepped to the very edge of the wooden stage. I looked directly at the crowd, addressing the wealthy investors and corporate executives who had just spent the last hour treating Derek like a prodigy. The man standing before you is not a tech visionary, I declared clearly. He is a financial parasite. His artificial intelligence startup has been legally bankrupt for exactly 1 month. He has zero incoming revenue. He missed his last 2 payroll cycles, and his chief financial officer resigned 2 weeks ago to avoid federal prosecution. Derek currently has $0 to his name. The ballroom erupted again. This time, the outrage did not come from my family. It came from the guests. Several prominent venture capitalists sitting near the front row immediately pulled out their cell phones, furiously typing messages to their respective finance teams. The illusion of wealth was the only currency that mattered in this room, and I had just exposed Derek as utterly penniless. Brittany let out a wounded, suffocating gasp. She looked at Derek, her eyes wide with mounting terror. He was shaking his head frantically, mouthing the word "no" over and over again, but the panic radiating from his body confirmed every single word I had just spoken. In fact, I continued, my voice slicing through the rising clamor. Derek owes my venture capital firm a massive amount of money. He secured a $2 million emergency bridge loan 30 days ago just to keep his office lights on for this wedding. He is drowning in toxic debt. Suddenly, a loud, booming laugh cut through the heavy tension. It was Richard. My father pushed his way past the chaotic head table and stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with sheer, unadulterated contempt. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo jacket, adopting the authoritative, patriarchal stance he used to intimidate his corporate rivals. "This is nothing but a jealous fantasy," Richard declared, pitching his voice loudly so his wealthy friends could hear him. He forced another hearty, dismissive chuckle, attempting to write me off as a hysterical woman. "You are embarrassing yourself, Chelsea. We all know you are upset about the wedding, but making up these ridiculous financial lies is pathetic. Derek is perfectly solvent. He showed me the paperwork himself. He has a highly secured bridge loan backed by a major anonymous private equity firm. They evaluated his company and gave him $2 million because his business model is flawless." Richard looked out at the audience, spreading his arms in a gesture of absolute confidence. "There is no bankruptcy. There is no debt crisis. My son-in-law is backed by one of the most powerful firms on the East Coast." I stood perfectly still. The corners of my mouth slowly curled upward into a chilling, predatory smile. I lowered the microphone slightly, locking my eyes directly onto my father. "I am the major firm, Dad," I stated softly, though the microphone carried the lethal words perfectly across the silent room. "And Derek just violated the repayment clause." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and suffocating. Richard stared up at me, the arrogant patriarchal sneer completely wiped from his face. All the color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin an unhealthy ashen gray. His broad shoulders slumped as his brain desperately tried to process the sheer magnitude of what I had just said. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The powerful executive, the man who had spent my entire life dictating my worth based on my income, was suddenly rendered completely speechless. I did not give him time to recover. I reached into the sleek black envelope one last time and pulled out the thickest stack of legal documents yet. The heavy paper rustled loudly in the quiet ballroom. To secure Derek's fraudulent loan, Dad, I announced, my voice carrying a lethal, unwavering authority. You and Mom bypassed standard banking protocols. You needed the cash fast to keep up appearances before this wedding, so you secretly put up the family estate as collateral. You bet the mansion, the grounds, and your generational wealth on a man you barely vetted simply because he promised you a massive return on investment. Richard took a shaky step backward, bumping into the edge of the head table. Derek kept his head down, staring at the floor, refusing to look his new father-in-law in the eye. Since Derek defaulted on that loan 14 days ago, I continued pacing to the center of the wooden stage, and since he signed the immediate repayment clause yesterday morning in my boardroom, the debt is now fully matured and instantly payable. Because Derek has absolutely zero liquid assets, the collection process automatically triggered against the secondary guarantors. That means you. I stepped to the edge of the stage and held the documents out. Kendra immediately walked up the wooden steps. Her emerald green dress swished elegantly as she approached me. I handed the thick stack of papers to my sister-in-law. Kendra took them with a sharp, victorious smile. She turned around and descended the stairs, her high heels clicking a slow, methodical rhythm against the marble floor. The entire ballroom watched Kendra approach the head table. She did not hand the papers to Derek or Brittany. She walked directly up to Richard. She slapped the heavy legal packet squarely onto his chest. Richard flinched instinctively, grabbing the documents before they could fall to the floor. Notice of foreclosure. Kendra declared, her voice ringing out with crisp legal precision. As the primary legal counsel representing the creditor, I am formally serving you. The bank executed the seizure order this afternoon. The county sheriff arrived at your property at exactly 5 o'clock today. The locks have been changed. The gates to the family mansion are currently chained shut. You no longer have access to the property, the vehicles inside the garage, or the safe hidden in the master study. You are officially homeless. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. You are officially homeless. For a family whose entire identity was built on the foundation of elite social status and material wealth, it was a death sentence. Patricia let out a high-pitched, blood-curdling shriek. The sound tore through the elegant ballroom, raw and completely unhinged. She stumbled backward, her silver mother of the bride dress catching on the leg of a chair. She collapsed hard into the velvet seating, clutching her chest with both hands as if she had just been shot. Her carefully arranged hair fell into her face as she began to hyperventilate. "Richard, do something!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking in pure frantic terror. "Tell her she cannot do this. Call our lawyers. Call the bank. We have important guests arriving at the house tomorrow for the post-wedding brunch. We cannot be locked out of our own home." Richard stared at the foreclosure notice in his hands, his eyes wide and unblinking. He flipped to the second page, recognizing his own digital signature on the collateral agreement. He looked at the bank seal. He looked at the county sheriff's execution order. He knew legal documents better than anyone, and he knew instantly that this was utterly airtight. There were no loopholes, there was no grace period. I had executed the trap with flawless precision. "This cannot be happening," Richard whispered, his voice trembling, stripped of all its former power. "We are ruined. We have nothing left." Up at the head table, Brittany stared at her parents in absolute horror. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating her thick skull. She had married a penniless fraud, she had been evicted from the luxury penthouse she planned to steal, and now the parents who had bankrolled her entire existence were completely destitute. She had no safety net, she had no fallback plan, the lifestyle she flaunted online was officially dead. Down on the main floor, the ripple effect of my announcement hit the prestigious guests like a tidal wave. In the ruthless, hyper-competitive world of high society and corporate finance, bankruptcy is treated like a highly contagious disease. The moment the elite country club members realized Richard was broke, the atmosphere in the room shifted violently. A prominent state senator who had been laughing and drinking champagne with Richard just 20 minutes earlier abruptly stood up from his table. He signaled his wife, grabbed her coat, and began power walking toward the heavy oak exit doors without looking back. A chain reaction followed. Chief executive officers, real estate developers, and wealthy socialites started whispering frantically to one another. They picked up their designer purses and adjusted their ties, edging swiftly toward the perimeter of the ballroom. Nobody wanted to be photographed at a wedding funded by fraud. Nobody wanted their name associated with a family that had just been publicly stripped of their assets and exposed as financial criminals. Patricia watched her elite friends fleeing the ballroom, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. "Wait!" Patricia called out to a woman in a diamond necklace who was practically sprinting for the door. "Please, it is a misunderstanding. We can explain." The woman did not even turn her head. She pushed through the double doors and disappeared into the lobby, eager to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of our family's spectacular demise. I stood on the stage watching the mass exodus of the people my parents cared about most. They had sacrificed my happiness, my financial security, and my engagement just to impress these exact people. Now those same people were stepping over each other to escape the sinking ship, leaving my parents drowning in the wreckage of their own greed. The ballroom devolved into absolute anarchy. The polite whispers of the country club elite transformed into furious shouts. These were not just social acquaintances. These were men and women who held substantial financial ties to my father. When blood is in the water, sharks do not swim away quietly. They bite. A prominent hedge fund manager marched right up to the head table. He slammed his fist down next to the ruined wedding cake. "Richard," the man bellowed, his face turning an ugly shade of magenta. "If your primary estate is in foreclosure, your entire asset portfolio is compromised. I am calling my legal team right now. I want my capital out of your commercial real estate syndicate by Monday morning. If you try to freeze my assets to cover your personal bankruptcy, I will see to it that you end up in a federal penitentiary." Richard weakly raised his hands, desperately trying to placate the furious investor. "Tom, please, you have to listen to me." My father begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic, groveling desperation I had never heard before. "It is a temporary liquidity issue. We can restructure the syndication. Just give me 48 hours to talk to the bank." "Do not bother," another voice shouted. A venture capitalist from Boston had his phone pressed tightly to his ear, pacing furiously near the ice sculpture. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Richard. "I am pulling my firm out of the downtown development project. You lied on your financial disclosures, Richard. You leveraged your equity to back a fraudulent tech startup. You are toxic waste." Within minutes, the remaining wealthy guests were furiously dialing their own lawyers, loudly demanding to pull their investments from my father's other portfolios. The sound of high society turning on one of its own was a chaotic symphony of overlapping threats and legal jargon. The jazz band had already packed their instruments and fled through the service exit. Up at the head table, the full gravity of the situation finally slammed into Brittany. She stood frozen amidst the shouting billionaires and fleeing socialites. She looked at her father, who was currently being berated by 3 different furious investors. She looked at our mother, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, completely ignored by the friends she had spent her life trying to impress. Finally, Brittany looked directly at Derek. The man she had just married was cowering near the edge of the stage, wiping blood from his split lip, looking utterly pathetic. He was not a tech visionary. He was a broke, desperate criminal who had just destroyed her entire safety net. Brittany realized she had absolutely nothing. No billionaire husband to fund her lavish lifestyle. She was married to a fraud, and her parents were entirely destitute. Something inside the golden child completely snapped. A visceral, ear-piercing scream ripped from her throat. She reached up with both hands and grabbed the imported silk veil pinned to her hair. With a violent, frantic yank, she ripped the veil from her head, tearing out chunks of her elaborate updo in the process. She threw the expensive white tulle directly into Derek's bleeding face with a savage, guttural sob. Brittany did not attack her new husband again. Instead, she spun around and turned her pure, unadulterated rage onto the woman who had orchestrated this entire catastrophe. She lunged toward Patricia, grabbing her mother by the shoulders of her silver dress and hauling her upright. "You lied to me!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing over the chaotic din of the arguing investors. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her perfectly curated influencer image completely obliterated. "You told me he was rich," she yelled. "You told me he was going to take his company public and we would be billionaires." Patricia cried out, trying to pry Brittany's manicured nails off her shoulders. "Brittany, stop it, people are watching us." "I do not care who is watching," Brittany roared, shaking our mother violently. "You set this up. You told me to sleep with him. You told me to get pregnant, so he would be forced to marry me before Chelsea could figure out he was a catch. You promised me I would never have to work a day in my life if I stole him." The entire ballroom went dead silent again. The angry investors stopped yelling. Kendra, standing near the edge of the stage, let out a low whistle of pure disbelief. Jason clenched his fists, his face hardening into a mask of absolute disgust. The ultimate betrayal had just been voiced out loud for the entire world to hear. Patricia had not just enabled the affair, she had actively orchestrated it. She had instructed her favorite daughter to seduce my fiancé and trap him with a pregnancy, all because she believed Derek was a billionaire. My mother had sold her own daughter into a fraudulent marriage just to maintain appearances and secure what she thought was infinite wealth. She had thrown my happiness into the incinerator without a second thought, purely for greed. Patricia gasped, looking around at the horrified faces of the few remaining country club guests. "Brittany, how could you say that out loud?" Patricia wailed, abandoning all pretense of maternal affection. "You selfish, stupid girl! You ruined everything! You were supposed to secure his money, not expose us!" "I did what you told me to do," Brittany screamed back, shoving Patricia backward into the table. "You ruined my life. I am married to a broke loser and we do not even have a house." Richard finally snapped. He lunged toward his wife and daughter. "Shut up!" he bellowed, his face purple with rage. "You are making us look like complete trash." "You are trash!" Derek suddenly shouted from the corner. The family turned on each other. They tore each other apart on the ruined head table. The night was not over yet. Heavy footsteps approached the main ballroom doors. The massive oak doors of the ballroom swung open with a resounding crash that finally silenced the remaining screaming guests. 3 uniformed sheriff's deputies marched into the room, their heavy-duty boots thudding against the polished marble floor. Their utility belts jingled and their radios crackled, slicing through the thick perfume and stale champagne air of the ruined reception. They stood shoulder to shoulder, scanning the chaotic scene with trained authority. Richard tried to puff up his chest and intercept them, instinctively falling back on his country club privilege. He took a step forward, raising a hand as if to dismiss them from his private event. "Excuse me, officers," Richard demanded, trying to project a confidence he no longer possessed. "This is a private reception. We are handling a minor family dispute. You have no jurisdiction to interrupt a closed event." The lead deputy completely ignored my father. He simply looked past Richard and locked his eyes directly onto the groom. Derek was still cowering near the edge of the shattered head table. When he saw the silver badges gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, the last shred of color vanished from his bruised face. He looked at the deputies. He looked at the heavy legal documents scattered across the floor. He looked at the swinging metal doors leading into the catering kitchen just 30 feet away. Survival instinct kicked in. Derek spun around and bolted. He scrambled over the broken pieces of the floral centerpieces, his expensive custom tuxedo shoes slipping wildly on the champagne-soaked floorboards. He shoved past a terrified waiter, knocking a silver tray of appetizers onto the ground. He sprinted toward the kitchen doors like a cornered animal, desperate to slip out through the service exit and vanish into the night. He did not even make it halfway across the dance floor. Jason moved with lethal speed. My older brother had spent the entire evening watching this fraudulent coward manipulate, lie, and destroy our family. Jason was not about to let him slip out the back door and avoid the consequences. He intercepted Derek with the precision of a freight train. Jason lunged forward and tackled Derek squarely around the waist. The impact sent both men crashing hard onto the wooden dance floor. Derek gasped for air as the breath was knocked completely out of his lungs. He flailed wildly, trying to throw punches, trying to claw his way out from under my brother. "You are not running away from this!" Jason growls, pinning Derek's arms firmly against the floorboards. "You do not get to walk away from the damage you caused. You are going to face every single consequence." Derek thrashed and cursed, kicking his legs, but Jason held him down effortlessly. The three sheriff's deputies jogged across the ballroom, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They reached the center of the dance floor just as Jason hauled Derek up by the collar of his ruined tuxedo jacket and shoved him roughly toward the authorities. "Is this man Derek Vance?" the lead deputy asked, pulling a folded warrant from his chest pocket. Kendra stepped out from the shadows of the stage, her posture radiating absolute legal authority. She walked directly up to the deputies, her high heels clicking sharply against the wood. She did not look at Patricia or Richard, who were watching in stunned, paralyzed horror. She only looked at the man who had tried to steal my life. "Officers, that is indeed Derek Vance." Kendra stated, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "I am the lead legal counsel for the creditor he defrauded. I filed the emergency injunction this afternoon. That man submitted falsified financial assets and forged corporate revenue reports across state lines to secure a $2 million commercial loan. He deliberately provided counterfeit bank statements to my client's firm here in New York, under the law that constitutes federal wire fraud." The lead deputy nodded, reading over the warrant. "Derek Vance, you are under arrest." The deputy grabbed Derek's arm, twisting it forcefully behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the steel handcuffs, locking around Derek's wrists, echoed loudly through the ballroom. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard all evening. I watched from the stage with perfect clarity as his arrogance was finally extinguished. Derek twisted his head around, his eyes wild and unhinged. The sophisticated tech founder was gone forever. He was just a pathetic, broke criminal caught in a trap of his own making. He realized his life was over. He realized he was going to a federal penitentiary. The sheer terror morphed into a vicious, cornered rage, and he turned that rage directly onto the woman who had helped him orchestrate this entire disaster. He looked up at the head table where Brittany was standing frozen and shivering in my stolen, torn wedding dress. "I want a divorce!" Derek screamed at the top of his lungs, his spit flying across the dance floor. His face was twisted into a hideous mask of hatred as the deputies began dragging him forcefully toward the main exit doors. "Do not think you are walking away from this untouched, Brittany. I want a divorce tomorrow morning, and you are paying half of my debt. You hear me? You are taking half of this massive bankruptcy with you." Brittany let out a high-pitched, terrified whimper. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wedding cake table. Her hands flew to her mouth. She looked at our mother silently, begging Patricia to fix this, to tell her that Derek was lying to magically erase the nightmare unfolding in front of her. But Patricia was staring blankly at the floor, completely broken, incapable of saving her golden child from the devastating reality. Brittany slowly turned her terrified eyes toward Kendra. She looked at my brilliant sister-in-law, her voice quivering with desperate childlike panic. "He is lying, right? Tell me he is lying. I do not owe his debt. I did not take out that loan. I am not responsible for his company's bankruptcy. You have to tell them I had nothing to do with his business accounts." Kendra looked at the spoiled, entitled woman who had spent her entire life stealing from me without ever facing a single consequence. Kendra offered Brittany a bright, razor-sharp smile that contained absolutely zero mercy. She adjusted her blazer and delivered the fatal blow. "He is absolutely right," Brittany, Kendra replied, her voice ringing out with cheerful, devastating finality. "You signed the official marriage license on the altar exactly 1 hour ago. You enthusiastically bound your legal and financial identities together in front of 300 witnesses. Under our state law, you share his debts now. You are legally responsible for the default. You are equally liable for the $2 million he owes my client. Congratulations on your beautiful union." The reality of her catastrophic mistake finally penetrated Brittany's thick skull. She had not stolen a billionaire husband. She had stolen a mountain of toxic debt, a federal criminal investigation, and a lifetime of financial ruin. There was no escape hatch. There was no secret trust fund to bail her out. Her entire glamorous influencer lifestyle was completely dead. Brittany let out a raw, agonizing wail. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed completely onto the floor, her expensive silk dress pooling around her as she began sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the departing deputies, instantly cutting off the chaotic sounds of Derek shouting his futile, desperate threats into the night. Inside the grand ballroom, the flashing red and blue lights from the federal cruisers pulsed aggressively through the sheer window draperies, casting an eerie, rhythmic glow across the ruined reception. The opulent space, which had cost me $150,000 just a few short hours prior, now resembled the devastating aftermath of a natural disaster. Broken crystal from shattered champagne flutes littered the polished marble dance floor. Overturned velvet chairs lay abandoned in haphazard piles. Half-eaten plates of expensive filet mignon and imported caviar sat completely ignored on the stained silk tablecloths. The catering staff and the cleanup crew hovered nervously in the far corners of the cavernous room, clutching their trays and brooms, unsure if they should begin clearing the tables or wait for the explosive family drama to finally conclude. Richard remained standing near the destroyed head table. He was completely catatonic. The realization that his entire commercial real estate empire, his elite country club standing, and his generational family estate had been wiped out in a single evening had completely short-circuited his brain. He stared blankly at the foreclosure notice still clutched tightly in his trembling hand, his breathing shallow and erratic. On the floor, Brittany continued to weep. Her theatrical, high-pitched sobs echoed endlessly through the empty hall, but there was no audience left to pity her performance. The wealthy socialites and powerful politicians had fled long ago, abandoning her to her fate. She was curled into a pathetic, shivering ball, the ripped silk of my stolen wedding gown, pooling around her in a filthy, champagne-soaked heap. She realized she was not going to wake up in a $3 million penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She was going to wake up to a mountain of toxic federal debt, zero income, and a husband facing a decade behind steel bars. Patricia looked frantically around the empty room. She saw the abandoned tables, the fleeing guests, and the absolute destruction of her carefully curated social universe. Her eyes darted wildly, searching the shadows for any possible escape route, any financial lifeline she could immediately grasp to pull herself out of the wreckage. Finally, her frantic, terrified gaze landed squarely on me. I stood on the edge of the wooden stage, looking down at the immense wreckage I had successfully orchestrated. I felt no remorse for the pain I had caused. I felt no lingering guilt over destroying their lives. I felt a profound, undeniable sense of absolute liberation that warmed my chest and cleared my mind. Patricia took a sudden, desperate step toward me, her silver mother of the bride dress catching sharply on a piece of shattered glass. She did not yell this time. She did not issue a harsh command or threaten my social standing. Instead, she resorted to the ultimate, most toxic weapon in her parental arsenal. She deployed raw maternal guilt. Patricia dropped heavily to her knees. She crawled across the damp dance floor, completely ignoring the expensive fabric of her designer gown, soaking up the spilled wine and crushed flowers. She reached the edge of the wooden stage and threw her arms forward, wrapping her hands tightly around my ankles. Her grip was desperate, and bruising, her perfectly manicured nails digging deeply into my skin as she anchored herself to my legs. "Chelsea, please," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with raw panic. Her face was a horrific mess of running mascara and smeared lipstick. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I raised you. You cannot do this to us. You cannot let your own flesh and blood live on the streets like common beggars. We have nowhere to go. Give us the house back. Forgive us for what we did. We will do anything you want. I will make Brittany annul the marriage tomorrow. Just give us our home back." I looked down at the weeping woman kneeling at my feet. For 33 years, this exact display of emotional manipulation would have worked flawlessly, I would have immediately folded under the pressure. I would have written a massive check to make the tears stop attempting to buy a temporary scrap of her conditional affection. I would have sacrificed my own financial security just to keep the fragile family peace intact. But the woman standing on that stage was no longer her willing scapegoat. I felt absolute ice flowing through my veins. I looked into her pleading, terrified eyes and saw nothing but the hollow, bottomless greed that had driven every single decision she ever made in her miserable life. I did not reach down to help her up. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I easily pried her desperate fingers off my ankles, breaking her iron grip, and took a deliberate step around her kneeling form. I walked straight past Patricia and approached my younger sister, who was still huddled pathetically on the floorboards. Brittany flinched violently as my shadow fell over her. She scrambled backward, hitting her shoulder hard against the heavy leg of the head table. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror, fully expecting me to deliver another fatal blow to her non-existent future. I crouched down so I was directly at eye level with the fallen golden child. I reached my hands out toward her neck. Brittany whimpered loudly, pressing herself flat against the wooden table leg, but she did not dare push my hands away. My fingers brushed against her collarbone as I located the heavy gold clasp of our late grandmother's antique diamond heirloom necklace. Patricia gasped loudly from her place on the floor, recognizing exactly what I was about to do. With a swift, precise motion, I unclasped the heavy diamond piece. The priceless gems slid effortlessly off Brittany's skin. I gathered the glittering necklace into my palm, feeling the comforting weight of the diamonds against my hand. I stood back up, holding the antique heirloom up to the harsh stage lights. "This is for the heir who actually protects the family," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. I unzipped my designer clutch and dropped the diamond necklace inside. The heavy thud of the gems hitting the bottom of my purse was the final period at the end of their fraudulent existence. I turned my attention back to Patricia. She was still on her knees, her hands reaching out toward me in a pathetic plea for a mercy I did not possess. "You made your bed, Mom," I stated, my tone devoid of any lingering warmth or hesitation. "Now sleep in it." I turned my back on my screaming mother, my paralyzed father, and my sobbing sister. I walked down the wooden steps of the stage, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the marble floor. Jason and Kendra were waiting for me near the exit doors. My older brother reached out, a look of profound respect and protective pride washing over his features. He offered me his arm. I took it without a second of hesitation. Kendra linked her arm through my other side, her sharp smile returning in full force. We did not look back. The three of us walked arm in arm across the empty ballroom, navigating the shattered remains of my parents' fallen empire. We pushed open the heavy oak double doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The suffocating tension of the country club instantly vanished, replaced by the crisp scent of freedom. A sleek black Maybach was idling smoothly at the bottom of the grand staircase. The driver stood by the open rear door, waiting respectfully for our arrival. The powerful engine hummed softly in the dark. We descended the stone steps together, leaving the agonizing sounds of my family's total destruction locked firmly behind us. Exactly 1 month later, the smooth leather seats and quiet hum of my Maybach were replaced by the harsh sputtering of a broken neon sign. The bright pink letters buzzed endlessly above a rundown diner on the outskirts of Queens. Inside the greasy establishment, the air hung thick with the nauseating smell of burnt coffee and cheap frying oil. A stained wet rag slapped aggressively against a sticky formica table. Brittany scrubbed furiously at a puddle of spilled syrup. Her hands, once perfectly manicured, were now cracked, blistered, and red from harsh dish soap. She wore a hideous brown polyester uniform that clung uncomfortably to her frame. There was no baby bump hiding beneath the cheap fabric. The pregnancy had been a complete fabrication. It was a desperate, calculated lie she orchestrated with our mother to force Derek into proposing before his financial house of cards collapsed. Now the only thing she birthed was a mountain of legal debt and a minimum wage job. A truck driver sitting in the corner booth snapped his fingers loudly, demanding a coffee refill. Brittany flinched. A month ago, she would have screamed at anyone who dared look at her the wrong way. Today, she simply grabbed the glass carafe and shuffled over with her head bowed in absolute defeat. Her influencer lifestyle was dead. Her phone disconnected weeks ago. Her social media accounts were abandoned graveyards filled with mocking comments. She poured the coffee silently, enduring the customers' rude grunts. Across the city, in a crumbling apartment building in a high-crime neighborhood, my parents were experiencing their own customized hell. The cramped one-bedroom unit smelled permanently of mildew and stale cigarette smoke. Water stains mapped the peeling ceiling above a stained futon salvaged from a discount warehouse. Richard stood in front of a cracked bathroom mirror. He was not adjusting a tailored Italian tuxedo. He was struggling to fasten the plastic buttons of a cheap security guard uniform. The man who had commanded boardrooms and bullied executives was now preparing for his 10-hour night shift patrolling a dying strip mall. His posture was completely defeated. The heavy bags under his eyes spoke of 30 sleepless nights agonizing over the millions he lost to his own reckless greed. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and walked into the tiny dark kitchen. Patricia sat hunched over a wobbly card table. She wore a faded bathrobe, her hair unwashed and pulled into a messy knot. The silver mother of the bride dress was long gone sold to a pawn shop to cover their first month's rent. Patricia stared blankly at the cracked screen of her prepaid mobile phone. She was scrolling through the social media feeds of the elite country club women she used to dominate. She watched videos of her former friends hosting lavish dinner parties. She had tried calling them during the first week of their bankruptcy. Every single number had been disconnected or routed straight to voicemail. She was a complete social pariah. Richard did not say a single word to his wife as he zipped up his oversized neon yellow jacket. The bitter resentment had eaten away whatever fragile bond they once shared. They blamed each other entirely for the catastrophic loss of their generational wealth. Richard opened the apartment door, the rusty hinges screeching loudly into the narrow hallway, and walked out into the cold night to guard an empty parking lot for $15 an hour. Patricia dropped her face into her hands and wept into the silence of the damp apartment. She had traded her luxurious mansion for a miserable prison of her own making. Speaking of prisons, Derek was currently rotting in a federal holding facility in Brooklyn. He had been denied bail. The federal prosecutors had frozen his empty bank accounts and presented him with a mountain of irrefutable evidence. The forged documents, the fabricated revenue reports, and the fraudulent loan applications had sealed his fate completely. He spent his days staring at a blank concrete wall facing a mandatory 10-year sentence for federal wire fraud. His desperate pleas for a public defender had resulted in a newly graduated lawyer who bluntly told him his only viable option was a swift guilty plea. The charismatic tech founder who tried to steal my life was now just another federal inmate waiting for a bright orange jumpsuit. Back at the diner, the rusted wall clock finally struck midnight. Brittany shoved the wet rag into a dirty plastic bucket. Her grueling double shift was finally over. Her feet throbbed in immense pain inside cheap sneakers as she pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the unforgiving city streets. A freezing torrential rain had begun to fall. She did not have a luxury car waiting. She did not even have an umbrella. Brittany pulled the collar of her thin jacket up against the biting wind and began the long, miserable walk toward the subway station. The icy rain soaked completely through her thin clothes within seconds, pasting her unwashed hair against her pale face. She shivered violently, stepping over deep puddles filled with city trash. As she approached the subway entrance, she walked past a brightly lit newsstand tucked under a canvas awning. The harsh fluorescent bulbs illuminated rows of glossy magazines. Brittany stopped dead in her tracks. The cold rain poured down her face, but she could not look away. Displayed front and center on the metal rack was the newest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a brilliant high-definition photograph of me. I was wearing a sharp power suit, standing confidently in front of the Manhattan skyline, with a radiant, commanding smile. The bold text across the cover read, "The New Queen of Venture Capital." Brittany stared at my victorious face. The sheer magnitude of her failure crashed down upon her all at once. She realized she had thrown away a lifetime of comfort and a sister who would have always protected her, all for a pathetic lie that left her with absolutely nothing. Her knees buckled. Brittany collapsed right there on the filthy sidewalk. She dropped her stained coffee apron directly into the freezing mud. The rain battered her shaking shoulders as she buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the dark, empty street. While my sister sat weeping in the freezing mud of a Queens sidewalk, completely stripped of her false influencer lifestyle and her fabricated billionaire dreams, I was standing 40 stories above the Manhattan pavement. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my brand-new corner office. The torrential rain from the previous night had completely washed the city clean, leaving the magnificent skyline sparkling under a brilliant blue canopy. I stood taking in the panoramic view of the empire I had built. The glass felt cool against my fingertips. I wore a tailored crimson power suit, a stark contrast to the muted navy bridesmaid dress they forced me to wear 30 days ago. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the apex predator of my own ecosystem. The heavy mahogany door to my executive suite clicked open. I did not turn around immediately. I allowed myself one final breath of absolute victory. Footsteps moved across the plush carpet, followed by the clinking of heavy crystal. I turned to see Kendra walking toward me. She wore a stunning ivory blazer, looking every bit the ruthless corporate litigator who had spent the last month legally dismantling my father's remaining assets. In her hands, she carried 2 crystal tumblers and a bottle of aged scotch. Kendra set the bottle down on my massive black marble desk. She poured the amber liquid with practiced precision, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She handed me one of the tumblers. Her dark eyes were bright with genuine pride. She did not look at me with the conditional approval my mother weaponized. She looked at me with the fierce respect of an equal. "We did it," Kendra said softly, raising her glass. "The board officially voted at 9 o'clock this morning. It was unanimous. You are now the youngest senior partner in the history of Apex Tower." I took the glass, feeling the cool crystal against my palm. "A unanimous vote," I repeated, letting the words settle into the quiet air. "Even the traditionalists backed me." Kendra laughed, a rich melodic sound that warmed the sterile corporate environment, echoing off the glass walls. "Of course they backed you, Chelsea. You executed the most flawless corporate takeover they have ever witnessed. You purged the toxic debt, liquidated the fraudulent holdings, and secured a massive, unprecedented return for the primary shareholders. You did not just survive that wedding disaster. You weaponized it. You turned a personal betrayal into the most profitable quarter this firm has seen in a decade." I took a slow sip of the scotch. The liquid burned pleasantly down my throat, grounding me in reality. "We weaponized it," I corrected her. "I could not have navigated the federal fraud charges or foreclosure proceedings without your legal strategy. You stood directly in the line of fire when my mother tried to tear this down. You are the architect of this victory, too." Before Kendra could respond, the office door swung open again. Jason strode into the room, bringing a rush of energetic momentum. My older brother looked sharper and more relaxed than I had seen him in years. The heavy burden of constantly appeasing our toxic parents had been completely lifted from his shoulders. He was his own man, and he was thriving. He carried a thick leather portfolio tucked under his left arm. He walked straight over to my desk and dropped the portfolio next to the scotch. He unzipped the case and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents, dropping them onto the marble with a satisfying thud. "I got the final signatures 10 minutes ago," Jason announced, a massive grin spreading across his face. "The acquisition is officially complete. We just bought out the last remaining commercial real estate syndicate that used to belong to Richard. We got it for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy liquidation. The prime downtown properties are fully integrated into your portfolio." I walked over to the desk and stared down at the documents. My father spent his entire life building that syndicate, using it to bludgeon his corporate competitors and assert his absolute dominance at the local country club. He leveraged it to buy Derek's fraudulent lies and lost it all. Now the very empire he used to make me feel small belonged entirely to me. I ran my fingers over the crisp pages. It was the ultimate, undeniable victory. Jason walked over to the makeshift bar cart and poured himself a glass of the aged scotch. He walked back to stand beside Kendra. The two of them stood shoulder to shoulder looking at me with unconditional support. I looked around the beautiful sunlit room. For my entire life, I had desperately chased the approval of people biologically wired to destroy me. I bled myself dry trying to fix a toxic family that viewed my professional success as a personal insult and my bank account as their personal property. Standing here now, I realized I had been looking for a family in all the wrong places. I raised my heavy crystal glass, holding it out toward my brother and my sister-in-law. They immediately raised their glasses to meet mine. Blood does not make a family. I said, my voice steady, powerful, and echoing with absolute conviction. Blood just gives parasites a map to your veins. Family is who stands next to you when you burn the old world down to build an empire. Jason smiled, a fierce look of pride in his eyes. Kendra nodded in silent agreement. The three crystal glasses met in the center of the room with a sharp, resonant clink. I turned my body back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the glittering New York skyline, watching the city move and pulse beneath my feet. The shadows of my past were completely gone, burned away by the bright, unstoppable light of the future I had forged. The ultimate lesson from Chelsea's journey is that biological ties do not excuse toxic behavior. For years, she was treated as a disposable resource by the very people who should have protected her. Her story teaches us that true empowerment comes from recognizing your worth and setting unbreakable boundaries. You do not owe your success or your peace to family members who only seek to exploit you. Walking away from a toxic environment is the ultimate victory in reclaiming your life and building your own empire. Share your experience in the comments below if you have ever had to draw a hard boundary with toxic relatives, and hit subscribe for more empowering stories.